Hello everyone and welcome back to my news show. Today is 29th of September. Now it's 10 past 11 in the morning Moscow time, and as always I have prepared quite a number of news on some major developments that Russian media and public is paying attention to, and hopefully you will find the news segment informative and useful. And if so, dear friends, please like the video, and if you can leave some commentary on any topic. More likes and comments most likely will help to deal with the algorithm, and maybe with your supporter this update will reach wider audience. That's been said, dear friends, let me remind you that initially these pre-recorded updates in the morning by local time are published on Patreon and Boosty first, and only after several hours on my YouTube and Rumble channels. So for early access and to support my work, if you like what I do, please consider to join our communities on Patreon or Boosty. Links are under this video in the description box and in the pinned comment. This evening at 10 p.m. Moscow time, I will launch a live stream with the second news update. And if you will find time, please join. It's going to be interesting. That's been said, dear friends. Let's go through some news now. And first of all, of course, reports about the so-called elections, parliamentary elections that took place in Moldova, former Soviet Republic, yesterday. It was anything but elections because of hundreds and most likely thousands of instances when rights of voters were disregarded by Western-controlled regime of Maya Sandu. But nevertheless, local so-called election committee has shared information about the so-called elections, and I will give you the numbers on that. So Action and the Solidarity Party, PSA, founded by Moldovan current president Maya Sandu, Western puppet by the way, could retain its parliamentary majority following the September 28 so-called elections, following the distribution of seats. This is according to preliminary data from the Central Election Commission. After 99.52% of votes has been counted. Thus, their PDS received 50.03% of the votes. The Patriotic Bloc, 24.26%. This is opposition bloc. The bloc of pro-European parties, Alternative, 7.99%. Our party, that's the name of it, 6.21%. The Democracy at Home party, 5.63%. So globalists and globalist control regimes in Europe did manage to maintain their majority in Moldova. And of course, there are many reports about criminal activity of the regime of Maya Sandu. These elections were rigged from there even before elections began, basically. I remind you, dear friends, that in Russia, for example, there is a 300 to 350,000 citizens of Moldova, and to vote, Moldavian regime of Sandu opened just two places, right, in Moscow, both, and only sent 10,000 ballots. So you tell me how 350,000 people are going to vote when only 10,000 ballots were sent by Sandu's regime. Is that actually free and fair elections? And by the way, according to some reports, in Europe is also about 300 to 350,000 citizens of Moldova. And you know how many places were open to vote for those citizens? 300. 300. Obviously, ones that are in Europe most likely were pro-European, right? Westernized or brainwashed, basically. And ones that are in Russia are pro-Russian and want to maintain close ties with Russia and want to avoid what had happened to the so-called Ukraine. That was also basically colonized by Western regimes. And so in Russia, there was only 2 places open for what? For 350,000 citizens of Moldova, and only 10,000 ballots were sent. And in Europe, 300 places were open for the votes. So these so-called elections were rigged from the beginning, and hopefully Moscow will refuse to recognize these results of these so-called elections. We will see. We will find out. But anyways, it seems like globalists did maintain their grip over the Moldova, and this would not end well for this former Soviet republic. I said many times before that Moldova is destined for a full-scale disintegration, and this interference of the Western regimes into Moldova's internal affairs will definitely fast-track inevitable disintegration of Moldova. It is what it is. And when it comes to crimes that was committed by Sandu's regime, yesterday evening already there were reports about more than 600 confirmed cases, incidents during these so-called elections when crime was committed by the regime. 624 incidents were identified during the parliamentary elections in Moldova. The human rights organization Promo-Lex reported in a report. And as I said, dear friends, this is just for yesterday evening. This news was published or updated at 20 to 9 p.m. in the evening, right? So that's it. That's it. Sandu's regime maintains majority in this so-called parliament, but yet again, Moscow did not yet commented on the issue, and my personal hope is that Moscow will refuse to recognize legitimacy of these so-called elections, because it was yet again anything but elections. And why should Moscow play along with the globalists and their freak show that they created in Moldova, right? Anyways, dear friends, that's when it comes to Moldova. That former Soviet republic is anyways destined for full-scale disintegration. So I could not care less, really. It's sad that eventually, due to this Western interference, locals gonna suffer, because this disintegration process is not gonna be pretty. That's it. That's what worries me, that ordinary people like us gonna end up being paying for crimes of their globalists and their puppets in a criminal regime there in Chisinau. Otherwise, I could not care less about Moldova, obviously. TASS news agency, meanwhile, is reporting that according to latest update of Russian Defense Ministry, 84 drones were intercepted overnight that was launched by Western-backed terrorist regime of Zelensky with assistance of NATO countries. I can give you some specifics, dear friends. 24 drones were intercepted over the Bryansk region, 21 over the Belgorod region, 9 over Voronezh region, also 9 over the Smolensk region, 7 over the Kaluga region, 4 over Moscow region, 3 over Oryol region, and 1 over Kursk region. And unfortunately, there was a tragedy in the Moscow region. 2 people were killed in this Ukrainian NATO drone attack. So 2 people, including child, were killed in a drone attack overnight in the Moscow region. This information is coming from governor of the region, and let me give you some details on that. So Moscow region governor Andrei Vorobyov made statement about it, that on his channel, that 2 civilians were killed. Unfortunately, tragedy occurred in Voskresensk. 2 people died in a fire in a private home. 76-year-old woman and a 6-year-old grandson of the woman. Yet another tragedy, crime, terrorist attack committed by NATO and the NATO proxy Kyiv regime. More lives being lost. And of course, Western media will pay no attention to this tragedy. They will report none of it, right? They never do. Because for Western so-called elites, for Western so-called media, Russian lives lives of the Russian people is nothing. That's what they are, Western so-called elites, man. Meanwhile, there was another terrorist attack committed by NATO and NATO proxy regime in the Belgorod region yesterday. According to some reports, HIMARS, US-made HIMARS multi-launch rocket systems were used to target energy facilities, some other infrastructure in the region, and when governor of the region, Gladkov, stated that as a result of Ukrainian strike on infrastructure, there was a major power outages, hospitals and utilities on backup power. Emergency work to restore electricity is underway. He urged residents to stay off streets as alerts about further attacks may be, may occur. Unfortunately, U.S. militaries, U.S. intelligence services still are actively engaged in this proxy war against Russia, and on a regular basis are providing their specialists on the ground and their proxy Ukrainian terrorists with their flight path and targeting data, with their satellite intelligence and the navigation for these US-made long-range weapon systems that HIMARS is a part of. And these missiles from HIMARS were launched from Kharkov, dear friends, from city itself. Well, this time, Russian military did not strike back exactly on a position of location of this HIMARS MLRS that was launching the missiles towards Belgorod region, but some other time Russian troops might respond immediately, strike back, and if collateral damage gonna occur, then you know why is that and who is to be blamed. The regime is using, not the first time, civilians as actual human shields, rather, to launch its long-range weapon systems. They are putting artillery, they are putting multi-launch rocket systems, drones, by the way, they are launching drones from their cities. And I can give you video, by the way, of video confirmation of that. This is not just their words. Let me show you this video that is. This is Kharkov city, by the way. And you can see launch of missiles from the city itself. So range of these missiles, according to some reports, when it comes to HIMARS missiles, are about 100 kilometers, right? And also HIMARS multi-launch rocket system is used to launch US-made ATACMS, tactical missiles too, with a range of 300 kilometers. That's what NATO does, that's what US does, that's what NATO proxy regime does. Let me continue with other news, dear friends. As I said, emergency services are working in the Belgorod region to restore supply of electricity to the customers. Vzglyad newspaper is reporting that Russian armed forces encircled basically Azov and Lut militants near the Klibambik reservoir. This is a DPR. So Russian armed forces units have blocked militants from their Azov neo-Nazi formation, designated a terrorist organization, and they're banned in Russia, and the Lut brigades at their Klibambik reservoir, completing the encirclement of their enemy in Donetsk People's Republic. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported, and yesterday, if you were watching my live stream, dear friends, I did share information about cleaning operation that is underway in Klibambik reservoir area, and I guess this cleaning operation will be finalized today, tomorrow, and these neo-Nazi elements from Azov and Lut and all the other formations that are encircled will be neutralized. Most likely, by the way, I don't think members of neo-Nazi formations have much chances to be taken a prisoner. I don't think so. My personal take, by the way, they have committed such atrocities, those neo-Nazis, that in mixed of fight, even if one of them would ask you to take them, take him prisoner, I think you would waste no time and take them out on the spot. And you would be justified because these are mass murderers. These are mass murderers and the terrorists. And terrorists are not under Geneva Convention, so you will have every right to do so, right? Yet again, this is my personal take on the matter. And well, one of the reasons why members of the Azov and other neo-Nazi formations are trying not to end up being captured is that they know they're not going to be received well. Because all of them have committed numerous crimes against civilians, by the way. TASS news agency is also reporting that according to Russian military expert Andrei Marochka, on the borders with their LPR, where fight continues, Kiev regime's forces last week lost more than or about 4,400 military personnel. Quite a big number, by the way, and this is just on the borderlines with the LPR. Overall casualty numbers of the Kiev regime last week probably is over 10, potentially 15,000. TASS news agency is also reporting that I did highlight this report yesterday too during their live stream that Russian armed forces liberated Derilovo, Maiskoe in a DPR, and Stepova in a Dnipropetrovsk region. Progress of the Russian armed forces continues, of course. If you listen to Western propaganda outlets, if you listen to Western so-called politicians and the public figures in Europe, in US, you might get impression that there is an actual stalemate and no movement is happening. But in reality, things are very different, and Russian armed forces, literally on daily basis, are liberating more and more territories. And veterans of our community know I'm reporting about liberation of this or that settlement on different sectors of the front line, practically on daily basis. Also, of course, topic of next phase of escalation that West is planning against Russia is still very much relevant. And Western media outlets, by the way, are giving us more and more indicators that something big is about to be launched. Something big is about to happen. Wall Street Journal, for example, report that Trump told Zelensky he was open to providing new long-range weapons to Kiev regime, and these new long weapons, might be Tomahawk cruise missiles and some other long-range means, ATACMS and other stuff. Also, according to Wall Street Journal, Trump did not exclude possibility that he would allow Kiev regime to use American long-range weapon systems for strikes deep into Russian territory. Of course, he would not refuse to give such authorization to Kiev regime. Why would he? I mean, he demonstrated on many occasions that he is an enemy of Russia, right? And cannot be, he is not about de-escalation, but exactly the opposite. So why would not he authorize U.S. weapon systems, long-range weapon systems, to use for strikes deep into Russian territory? That's exactly the reason why those long-range weapons were transferred on the Kiev-controlled territory to begin with, right? And on this very matter, there are already reports, by the way, that Trump, of course, authorized strikes deep into Russian territory. And when it comes to Tomahawk missiles, which is I would say big deal, because according to some reports, Tomahawk is a nuclear-capable missile, and if they are launched to strike deep into Russia, how Russian military should know these missiles are equipped with a nuclear warhead or with something else, with conventional warhead. How should Russian militaries know what kind of warhead is in these cruise missiles? But J.D. Vance, U.S. Vice President, also spoke about this topic. Let me give you some details. U.S. is considering making a long-range Tomahawk missiles available for Ukraine. Vice President J.D. Vance told the Fox News on Sunday. Several Western media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and the Telegraph, previously reported that Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky specifically requested the missiles during a meeting with the US President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York last week. According to Wall Street Journal, Trump did not oppose the idea and was also open to lifting restrictions on Kyiv's use of US-made weapons to strike deep into Russian territory, but made no specific commitments during the meeting. The president was previously against giving Tomahawks to Ukraine, according to Axios. Was he against it, really? We should keep in mind, dear friends, that all these Western elites themselves are engaged personally, including US President Trump, in deception operations, right? And we have proof of that. And just remember what happened with Iran, by the way. Trump and Witkoff, his special envoy, were negotiating with Iranians on a nuclear program. And at the same time, according to Israeli media, by the way, Trump, from the beginning of these negotiations, were actively engaged with the Israeli regime, with Netanyahu's regime, in this deception operation to basically lie to the teeth to the Iranians to cut them off guard. And unfortunately, they succeeded in that, and in Iran, at least partially, was cut off guard when Israel and US launched their strikes on the Republic, right? So, and it's not just our so-called elites in the West that are personally engaged in deception operation and have weaponized their diplomacy, but of course, Western so-called media does the same, and they cannot be trusted ever, period, right? And well, J.D. Vance spoke about the topic of Tomahawk missiles. So we are certainly looking at it, Vance said when asked if Washington is considering selling their missiles to other NATO members so that they could be handed over to Kyiv. And by the way, when they are talking about transferring certain weapon systems to formerly Kyiv regime, those weapon systems usually are already there. That was the case before, and most likely it is going to be the case in regards to Tomahawk if those missiles actually going to be deployed against Russia by a US, right, by NATO. And let me give you a short clip of Vance when he was talking about these Tomahawk missiles. Let's listen
okay with them having Tomahawk missiles and the threat that would pose and the possible escalation it would pose, because there was a time when you were very much in favor of, backing away from this situation in terms of our support of Ukraine.
Well, one of the things I've always said, Martha, is I wanted the Europeans to step up in a big way. I wanted us, the United States, to stop shoveling money and weaponry to a conflict that was so far away, when I felt like the Europeans, with all due respect for them, were not actually taking their fair share of the burden. Because of the president's leadership, you now have the Europeans buying weaponry from the United States as opposed to us giving it. And you asked this question about Tomahawks. It's something the president's going to make the final determination on. What the president is going to do is what's in the best interest of the United States of America. That's the driving light between his foreign policy decisions, between his defense policy decisions, and that will be the same heuristic that we apply to how we answer this question about Tomahawks. I'll let the president speak to it, but I know that we're having conversations this very minute about that issue.
So, I don't know, you tell me, dear friends, how further escalation with Russia is in best interests of the US citizens, US public. I don't think it is, right? So J.D. Vance, like his boss, Trump, lies, right? Freaking liars, by the way. That's what these elements are, really. And, well, as I said, why would Trump not authorize use of US-made long-range weapon systems, right? If they are transferred to Kyiv regime, when that is the main goal from the beginning, right? To harm Russia as much as possible. And U.S. envoy Kat Kellogg made it clear also during the interview on Fox, I think, that there is authorization in place, and long-range weapon systems from US can be used to strike deep into Russian territory. And I remind you, dear friends, that these long-range weapon systems cannot be used without direct participation of the US intelligence and the militaries, because who gonna provide these weapons with the flight path targeting data, satellite navigation, and so on? It's US militaries, right? US intelligence and US militaries. So it's a direct act of war that is committed by US against Russia every time these long-range strikes are happening, right? But let's listen to Kellogg, what he has
so
to
that
say.
it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president.
I think reading what he has said and reading what Vice President Vance has said, as well as Secretary Rubio, the answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuaries. That's one of the reasons I believe that this last week, and it has been confirmed, that President Zelensky asked President Trump to get Tomahawk missiles, which give you a depth. They're really good systems. America makes the best systems in the world.
Are we giving him the Tomahawks?
Well, that decision has not been made, but he's asked. I know that President Zelensky did, in fact, ask for them.
Most likely decision about Tomahawks already been made, and they will hope to transfer these weapons in secrecy so that they will catch Russia off guard, but it would not work. I think it would work. It would not work. Russian intelligence most likely has well enough and good enough information to know what kind of weapon systems are actually transferred to Kiev regime, and hopefully with the long-range strikes, most of or all of these long-range weapon systems, Tomahawks or ATACMS or German Taurus cruise missiles, will be destroyed in warehouses before they've been used to strike Russia. But Kellogg is quite clear there, isn't it? Of course, authorization is given to strike deep into Russian territory. Why otherwise those weapons will be given to their proxies, right? So, dear friends, we have just way too many indicators that are confirming, basically, you can say indirectly, but still confirming that U.S. administration is not about the escalation. U.S. administration, Trump and his team are not trying to pull out U.S. from this proxy war, as America First people in the U.S. are demanding, right, to keep U.S. out of these wars. It's exactly the opposite what is happening, and Trump is fully on board with the neocons and the globalists to continue this proxy war against Russia. All his latest statements are confirmation of that, and don't buy into this false narrative that is being generated, that while making statements that it's up to Europe now to take care of this proxy war, by saying so Trump is dumping Ukraine. Basically, no, it's not the case, because in the very same statement when Trump said Europe should lead efforts against Russia, he said that NATO too, and he was more focused on NATO actually, and which country is most powerful member of the NATO, which country pays most when it comes to NATO? It's US. I mean, last time I checked, it was US, right? And if Trump is not saying, well, US not going to be engaged, but if Trump says NATO going to do whatever it takes to harm Russia as much as possible, I mean, is there much difference really? No, because US is a NATO, and there is no NATO without US. So simultaneously with the preparation of the ground for next phase of escalation that I have spoke about many times before, that West gonna launch in a relatively short time, saying Western elites are generating these false narratives that well, US is dumping Ukraine on Europe and pulling out this conflict. This is all part of deception operation. It's a complex deception operation to catch Russia off guard. But my hope is that Russian leadership will not buy into this nonsense that is coming from either Washington or any other capital of the collective West. I said a million times before, and I will repeat that Western so-called elites cannot be trusted even for a second, and not now, and not ever, at least until Western societies will manage to reclaim their own country and make some changes in elites, make some significant changes in elites so that some decent human beings will be the leaders of the Western countries, not this despicable scum of humanity that are charged right now of whole of Western world, right? Anyways, dear friends, let's continue with some other news. Unfortunately, on daily basis, we have more and more indicators that this next phase of escalation is being prepared and is about to be launched. Meanwhile, I guess on the statements of Kellogg, maybe on statements of J.D. Vance, but aide of Russian president or a special envoy of Russian president Kirill Dmitriev made interesting, I will say, comment that the relentless disinformation campaign by the deep state, globalists, and the EU-UK warmongers risk driving disastrous decisions that could dramatically heighten their threat of global conflict. Understanding the Russian perspective is critical for global security and their stability. And well, I will agree with Kirill Dmitriev. It is just that obvious, by the way. I mean, absolutely obvious that so-called deep state in the US and also in Europe, by the way, this deep state is not something unique for the US, isn't it? So deep state in US and Europe, neocons in US and globalists in Europe, they are definitely pushing hard for next phase of escalation against Russia, and they are using their influence to keep everyone in the collective West in check, in order, right, including US administration. And if a month or 2 months ago, 3 months ago, some people still have some doubts about Trump's stance and stance of this current administration in US, now there should be no questions about it, because everything Trump does, one thing is the statements, but take a look at the policies, by the way. Just a week ago, Trump authorized a new military aid package for Kiev regime worth $500 million. Head of Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, stated on the TV, by the way, that this is just the first waiver. $2 billion already been allocated for additional military aid packages that been agreed with Washington. So that's $2.5 billion worth of weapons that US is sending, basically, to prolong this proxy war as much as possible and to harm Russia. Also, in addition to that, a couple of weeks ago, there was reports that Trump administration authorized, Trump himself, I guess, authorized transfer to the regime 3,000 plus cruise missiles. 3,000 plus cruise missiles, not the Tomahawk missiles. I don't think US has 3,000 Tomahawks, but some other cruise missile was developed especially to be transferred to Kiev regime with a range of 400 to 450 kilometers, and 3,000 of those missiles gonna be transferred to control territory, right? And now discussions are about more ATACMS tactical missiles and more, and even Tomahawk cruise missiles with a range of from 1,500 to up to 3,000 kilometers to be transferred to the regime. So let's take in account policies, actual policies of the Washington. And when you take a look at it, I mean, it is becoming clear that no, this administration is not about de-escalation. They are trying to kind of do some damage control, right? And save the face in case they are losing this proxy war against Russia. And of course, they're going to lose this proxy war against Russia. And that's why both sides, US and Europe, are making some statements. In case of US, they are emphasizing that it's up to Europe and NATO, without mentioning US and how much what kind of role the US plays either in Europe or in NATO. And European elites are beginning to whine about US dumping Ukraine, which is a false narrative, of course, but they are preparing ground also to then claim when Russia will force globalists and neocons and all the other enemies to capitulate, this narrative will let European so-called elites to say that, you know what, US dumped the Ukraine and that's why we lost. That's what it is. But in meanwhile, when it comes to developments on the ground, both sides, US and Europe, doing whatever they can to harm as much as possible Russian Federation and to send more weapons, more money, more assistance. So no one should buy this nonsensical stuff that Trump's administration is about the escalation. No, man, no. And I guess Kirill Dmitriev were also on the same page now, because his earlier statements were quite positive in regards to Trump and his administration. Probably he was hoping that, America First forces were, having initiative and control in the White House. But I guess Kirill Dmitriev is realizing that, no, man, it's neocons that are in charge there and the globalists. And this is true. This is true, right? Anyways, it is also interesting that President of Belarus issued some warnings for Trump. He had a meeting with the Russian president just like yesterday or day before yesterday, and while Russian president maintains his cooler, he is not really commenting on statements of Trump. Lukashenko did comment, and let me give you some quote from his statement. I'd like to see some kind of scheme not played out, like I'll give the weapons, sell them to Europeans and let them supply Ukraine with whatever they want. Look, we are adults. I give them to Europeans and the Europeans paid, or maybe they did not pay, but just like Biden gave weapons before they went to Ukraine. Are you going to check who paid whom and what? Lukashenko is saying it's just a rehash of their same old story, just with their different arrangements. Otherwise, it's all the same old story. Lukashenko told reporters in the Kremlin after talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and basically Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko hopes, said that he hopes that U.S. President Donald Trump will not build combinations of selling American weapons to European countries and supplying them to Ukraine. Well, he knows, by the way. He's been also kind of diplomatic, but what hopes, man? Everything already is set and done, right? The U.S. is already sending additional military aid packages, including long-range weapon systems. So maybe it is time to stop this game of politeness and just treat Trump's administration in a very same way that Moscow or the Minsk was treating Biden's administration. It's the same groups of interests are in charge now and were in charge then. It's so obvious, isn't it? But nevertheless, by the way, these statements of Lukashenko that are kind of warning shots towards Trump and his administration was made after his meeting with the Russian president. So I guess Russian president is on board with this statement. This was a message, basically, from both. My personal interpretation. Lukashenko is sending message from both, from him and from Russian president. And if that is case, then soon we're going to see significant change in the rhetoric about it. I think this statement of Kirill Dmitriev, also the statement of Lukashenko, clearly indicates that I guess Kremlin had enough of their games that Trump and his inner circle are engaged. And if so, we're soon gonna see some change in attitude and the rhetoric that we see and hear from Moscow towards the Washington. Let's see. Meanwhile, dear friends, if anybody has any doubts that NATO is directly engaged in a war against Russia, which is true, and Russian foreign minister said it directly that NATO is engaged in a war against Russia. Well, former chief of MI5, British Secret Service, stated that indeed UK is already in state of war with the Russian Federation, which is true, by the way. I remind you that it was a British Secret Services, British militaries that were leading terrorist attack on Russian nuclear triad. Of course, US Secret Services, CIA was involved in that, but leading force was British intelligence, right? You remember strikes on Russian nuclear triad when airfields were targeted, where strategical bombers were located, right? And even though that should be red line, that's supposed to be red line, I mean, strike, this large-scale strike on Russian nuclear triad, Moscow did not retaliate on UK, neither on UK, neither on US, and I think this absence of retaliation emboldened London big time, emboldened Washington big time, Paris big time, Berlin big time, and they are now plotting next phase of escalation with a much bigger assault on Russia, much bigger assault on Russia. Probably they think Moscow will not retaliate this time around too, but I think they are wrong. They're going to provoke Russian retaliation. And the retaliation is going to be in such a scale that after that, we might see some tit-for-tat exchange of strikes, like once or twice, but then globalists will have no option. Globalists, neocons, and all the other Russian enemies will have no option but to face the reality, acknowledge that they lost this proxy war, and to capitulate. That's how it's going to be. And former head of MI5, British Secret Service, Minningham Buller, is definitely correct, while saying that, well, UK is possibly, she said, possibly is already in a state of war with Russia. It's not possibly, it's factual. It's factual. And, well, when Russia will have no option but to take action, dear friends, everyone in the Western countries should remember that Russian leadership was exercising restraint for a very, very long time, despite all sorts of provocations by NATO, including attacks on Russian nuclear triad. Everyone should remember that Russia exercised restraint far longer than any other country would, any other nuclear country would. But eventually, everything that has its beginning has its end also, and that can be said about patience of the Russian leadership. That is running out, I think. And when it comes to Western, war against Russia, proxy war, okay, but still war, in which NATO countries are directly involved. We have also this report that NATO troops are massing on the border with Russia in Finland. So NATO countries will jointly form a land bridge called the Finnish Forces RLF or FLF, which will be stationed in the Finnish Lapland near the border with the Russian Federation. The new unit will be created based on the Swedish Norrbotten Brigade, but it will also include servicemen from Norway and Denmark, as well as 3 British officers. Of course, Scandinavian countries are proxies of the UK, by the way. Historically speaking, that's, for quite a long time now, it's factual. London is in charge there. So British officers probably will oversee this grouping of forces from Scandinavian countries. The number of these hostile troops on the border with Russia is estimated to be between 4,000 and 5,000. You might say, well, not a big deal for 5,000, but well, 5,000 here, for 5,000 there, another 5,000 somewhere else, and if you take in account all the enemy forces that are right next to Russian border right now, then you come up with quite a big number, and of course we will obliterate them, no doubts about that, if it comes to it. But it does not mean that we should not take it in account. We should not pay much attention to all these escalatory steps that NATO is taking. Of course, we should pay attention to it and we should prepare, because it's easy to say, we will obliterate them, but to do so, you have to be prepared, right? You have to be in a position to do so. So obviously, this type of information is something that not just me paying attention to, but I'm quite sure Russian militaries do also. In addition to this, Norwegian brigade called Finnmark will also be deployed on Russia's northern border. So that's another 4,000 or 5,000 troops, right? That's what standard number of NATO brigade is. Okay, we will take it into account, and the Russian militaries will come up with countermeasures. So if necessary, we are ready. Now some other regions, by the way, Middle East. Jerusalem Post published an article that Benjamin Netanyahu will meet with the Yesha Council, whatever that is, to discuss the possibility of annexing the West Bank ahead of upcoming meeting with Donald Trump. And well, even though Trump stated during recent talk with the journalist that he will not allow Israel to occupy West Bank, I think nobody in this world, probably literally nobody in this world, probably believed in Trump's statements. He is just lying constantly, right? And of course, Trump is in no position to stop Netanyahu's regime. If anyone is in charge in that sick relationships between Netanyahu's regime and the American political class, it's definitely not American political class. If anyone is in charge there, it's Israeli regime, Israeli secret services, and the Israeli lobby. And on the topic of who has what influence in Washington, dear friends, let me give you some short clip that will give us some answers. House Speaker Mike Johnson in US is clearly demonstrating that.
Reported and confirmed that the president also made the statement that he would not allow Israel to annex areas in the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria. Now, I know just last month, you were the first House Speaker to ever go into Judea and Samaria.
Pay attention, dear friends, to this topic. I guess there is a new talking point among Zionists that will be pushed on so-called media that they control, on so-called politicians, public figures in the West, including in US. They will try to erase name of Palestinians from the conversation, word Palestine and Palestinians from conversation. In this 10-second frame, whoever this freaking idiot is, host of their show or whatever, twice said Judea and Samaria. Really? Really?
Have you had a chance to talk with the president about his perspective and statement on this?
I haven't yet. Since he had that speech, I've been back home in Louisiana, and he's been quite busy. We spoke a couple of times on the phone about other matters, but haven't had a chance to delve into that. I mean, look, my position is the same as yours, Tony, and so many who have studied the history of Israel and followed this and support our ally there so strongly. I mean, I believe Judea and Samaria are the traditional lands that belong to Israel. But there's a lot of geopolitical forces at play here. I think there's a lot more to be settled out, and we'll have to see how it develops.
So do you need any more answers, dear friends? Who is in charge in US? Zionists, Israeli Secret Services, Israeli regime, or American people? I think answer is clear. I think answer is clear. There is nothing to add, really. US is run by despicable scum of humanity that is heavily compromised and controlled by all sorts of groups of interest, but definitely not by US citizens, no, not by US public. These elements, like Johnson and others, have no care about US citizens, man, and their day-to-day life. Absolutely. Anyways, let me give you some more news, dear friends. It's not just, as I said, man, entire political class in US is compromised and packed with all sorts of morons, right? And one of them is Ted Cruz, who posted, as you can see on your screen, who posted some crap attacking Tucker Carlson. Basically, he said that Tucker Carlson has boldly come out for regime change. Of course, it's not Iran or Qatar or China, actual enemies of America, aren't his concern. They've got too much dollars. Instead, it's his favorite enemy, Israel. And Ted Cruz is finalizing, like, tragic. This is insane, by the way. This is insane. First of all, I don't think Tucker Carlson considers Israel to be his enemy. All he's talking about is that U.S. government should prioritize the interests of the U.S. public, U.S. citizens. And what is wrong with that? I don't think there is anything wrong with demanding that government in every single country to work for its people. That's what government is there for in the first place, right? So Tucker Carlson is not saying anything controversial, but on the other hand, by the way, level of stupidity of this so-called political elites in the West and in US in this particular case is just unbelievable. Ted Cruz branded Qatar as enemy of US. Why he did this? Because Israel attacked Qatar. Israel bombed the Qatari capital just now. And formally, at least formally, by the way, Qatar is a US ally. That was the case last time I checked it. And Qatar is hosting biggest US military base in the Middle East. And Ted Cruz is calling Qatar enemy. We are used to crazy statements from US politicians in regards to Iran, in regards to China, in regards to Russia, but they are beginning trash talk about their own allies, if Israel wants to. And once again, you tell me, dear friends, who is in charge there in US? For whom these so-called politicians are working, for US citizens or for Israel? I think answer is clear. And shame on whichever district or state voted for Ted Cruz to send him to make him a lawmaker, by the way. I mean, what kind of future a country gonna has when people like Ted Cruz are lawmakers there? These uneducated, these stupid people, man. Unbelievable, man. I mean, really, it's just too crazy. Meanwhile, very interesting news I saw in Geopolitics Prime Telegram channel, according to which a senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader stated that Tehran should consider joining the new Saudi-Pakistan defense agreement, proposing Iran, Iraq, and their others form a collective security bloc. And this is a big deal, if true, by the way, and if Tehran and Riyadh and Islamabad will reach such an agreement, well, this is going to be potentially game changer in a region, because now Saudi Arabia has a nuclear umbrella after a recent agreement between Riyadh and Islamabad on mutual military defense. And if Iran joins this agreement, if Iran and the Saudis, or if Iran and most importantly Pakistan will have a similar agreement in place, then Iran will also gain nuclear umbrella, and this might be game changer, because if Islamabad will go ahead with this decision, that will mean that China has more influence in Pakistan than US, because US would never allow this to happen, right? And if Iran and Pakistan will sign up for such an agreement about mutual defense pact, that will cut short capabilities of the globalists, neocons, and Israel to mess around the region, to mess around regional countries, and to provoke a regional war, as globalists and the neocons are dreaming about, because they want to shut down navigation in the Persian Gulf for a long term. That's why they want to provoke a regional war on sectarian and ethnic lines. And by doing so, they want to cut off China from, and global South in general, from Middle Eastern energy sources. So if Iran will go ahead with this position, if this with this direction, and if Islamabad, yet again, if Islamabad is that free from US's influence that they will offer nuclear umbrella to Iran, then this might be the game changer, because yet again, this will first of all demonstrate that Chinese influence is much higher in Pakistan than US's influence, and secondly, and China will encourage, in that case, of course, Pakistan to sign up for such an agreement, because neither China, neither Russia, neither any other country in this world, by the way, nothing to be said, the regional countries in the Middle East, want to see any regional conflict there and navigation to be shut down in the Persian Gulf. So this is a big deal, man. Some very serious stuff is happening in the Middle East, and widely unnoticed by many, right? Recent agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan on mutual defense, by the way, that was a big deal, right? And I assume that was a green light for Iran to go ahead and build the nuclear weapons, because Saudis have a nuclear umbrella now. But Iranian leadership on several occasions after that stated in past several days that they have no nukes and they have no plans to build the nukes. And in that case, this scenario that Iran is joining this pact between Saudis and Pakistan definitely does make sense. Definitely does make sense. Iran would not need no freaking nukes in that case if Pakistan can provide nuclear umbrella. So some very important developments there that worth our attention, I think. Also, dear friends, yesterday during the live stream, I did mention this news that Iran and Russia signed $25 billion nuclear plant deal. So Iran has signed a $25 billion agreement with Russian state energy corporation Rosatom to construct 4 nuclear power plants. Tehran's IRNA news agency reported on Friday, and this is big, man. What can I say about it? Numbers are quite telling. 4 more nuclear power plants, $25 billion. Cooperation between Russia and Iran is accelerating, including in nuclear field, which is good and beneficial for both, right? Great news there. And also when it comes to Rosatom, which is a leading company, by the way, in this world, and in terms of building nuclear power plants. Also interesting news that Russia and Vietnam might sign a deal this year on building Vietnam's first nuclear power plant. Duma Energy Committee Chair Shulginov stated about it. Project would be led by Rosatom, world's leader in nuclear exporter. Over 30 of its reactors are already under construction on or contracted worldwide. So interesting news there also, isn't it? Interesting news. RT is reporting that, US is preparing options for strikes inside Venezuela. This was reported by NBC, and of course, none of us are surprised to hear about it. After all, Pentagon is increasing its military presence off coast of Venezuela. Not for nothing. Obviously, it's a matter of time, and US will probably go ahead with a regime change, with decapitation strike on Venezuela and regime change operation. Question is how ordinary people in Venezuela will react, right? If they will oppose US, in that case, I don't think Pentagon will be able to actually establish control over the Venezuela, because one thing is to do regime change, another to actually have a control, right, on territory. So if people of Venezuela will fight, then US will have no chances recolonizing Venezuela. If people would not fight, then US might achieve its goals. We will see. And also, I want to end, dear friends, this news segment on this report from Washington Post that new details allegedly emerge on Hexet's unusual mass gathering of top brass. The head of the Pentagon, Hexet, ordered hundreds of generals from around the world to come to and listen to his speech about military standards and combat morale. Maybe this is deception that Washington Post is engaged, because I find it difficult to believe that Hexet will actually call 800 generals and admirals from all over the world, US generals and admirals from all over the world, including from military operation zones, to come to Quantico to listen his speech. I mean, this is just too crazy, really. So therefore, I think real topic of discussion during that gathering will be steps that Pentagon will take or avoid during the next phase of escalation that West will launch against Russia in short time. I think that is going to be main topic of discussion. And to hide that main topic, of course, they will come up with some other topics too to divert the attention. But I'm not believing that Hexet will call 800 freaking generals to give some speech before them. It's just too crazy even for our current administration of US, man. So therefore, probably they're going to discuss, as I said, steps that Pentagon will take or avoid during this next phase of escalation that West is about to launch against Russia, led by globalists. Anyways, dear friends, this is it for news segment. Hopefully you will find it informative, interesting, useful, and if so, please like the video and leave some commentary on any topic. More likes and comments most likely will help to deal with the algorithm and reach wider audience. And if you like my work, if you want to support me to maintain this project, you can do it through several means. You can donate to this project through PayPal platform or Boosty platforms. Links are on this video description box and in the pinned comment. You can also subscribe to my Patreon page or page on Boosty, where I have quite a number of extra content on a regular basis. And this video, this morning updates, let's say, or first updates, initially are published on Patreon and Boosty, and only after several hours on YouTube and Rumble. So you will have also early access to these updates, along with whatever other content I will publish there. Links to my Patreon and Boosty also are on this video description box and in the pinned comment. This is it for now, dear friends. Have a nice day, and I hope you will join the live stream this evening, 10 p.m. Moscow time. I will prepare interesting news update for you. Bye for now.